Those of you who follow me on Twitter know that if there's one guy I cannot stand, it's Michael Tracy. The reasons are too many to list, but if I had to attribute it to a single quality, it's that he's insufferable. It might not be his fault, honestly. It could be a product of the head injury he sustained after being powerbombed by Maxine Waters back in 2017. We may never know what he would have been were it not for that devastating assault. Either way, you have to really suck to get me to side with Michael Tracy in an argument. Incredibly, a dude named Jonathan Alpart did just that. In April of 2020, after Bernie Sanders ended his presidential campaign, Alpart, who was a Sanders supporter, had a conversation with Michael Tracy wherein he laid out the case that Bernie was robbed yet again. This exchange is one of the most unbelievable things I've ever seen.
Let me ask you this. Why do you believe the results at all, like in Michigan?
Why do I believe the? What do you mean? I don't get.
Why do you believe the election results?
I'm not sure what you mean. Are you saying you don't believe the election results in Michigan?
No.
On what grounds?
Well, I would like to ask, what grounds do you have for believing them?
Okay, so extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if you're making the extraordinary claim that the Michigan primary results are fraudulent, then I think it's incumbent on you to state your reasons.
I actually disagree. I think it's an extraordinary claim to assume that our elections are legitimate.
Do you believe the New Hampshire primary results?
I really don't believe any of it. I think it's all just kind of made up.
Do you believe the Nevada caucus results?
I mean, do I believe places where Bernie won? If that's what you mean?
Yeah,
sure.
So you believe the outcomes are legitimate in the states that Bernie happened to win, but not the states that he lost?
Yes, even though I know that makes me sound very biased and ridiculous, but I mean, I could expand on it, but yeah.
I've accused Bernie supporters of only believing the results when they win, but I've never seen a straight-up naked admission of just that from one of them. His big complaint was about the voting machines.
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm sure you know, our election machines are a complete disaster. They have no security at all. It's not even an exaggeration. I mean, literal children can hack them. Our election machines are owned by shadowy companies who have ties with government. They're not secure at all. There's no transparency. I mean, why should we believe in the most powerful, wealthy country in the world that there would not be malfeasance?
He did not think this one through.
I mean, I would like someone to prove to me that our elections are real.
Okay. Are you aware that Michigan uses paper ballots only?
I was not aware of that.
To be fair, this was just some dude who was on Twitter. His account has been suspended, so who knows if he's even still on there. We've never heard anything about manipulated voting machines from Bernie Sanders, his subordinates, or any of his supporters in new media. This is usually the sort of thing you hear from butthurt Trumpers who can't handle the fact that daddy lost. No, you know the sort of thing we hear from burners. Barack Obama got everybody to drop out to prevent Bernie from winning.
And of course, in those crucial post-South Carolina days, he was back there working the phones to get Amy and Pete to drop to clear the path for Joe once he realized there was literally no other anti-Bernie choice.
The straws they're grasping at are usually of this sort. This isn't just something folks on YouTube or Twitter say. This has been repeated by Bernie's actual campaign staff. I've gotten into enough arguments on Twitter and in the comment sections of videos to know that it doesn't matter that there's no evidence to suggest that Barack Obama was behind candidates dropping out. It's actually not even that there's no evidence of that. The evidence shows that it didn't happen. For example, the timeline of Buttigieg's exit from the race is actually in film.
That's how you end a presidential campaign.
When did you make that decision?
Overnight, just before bed, we did a call and just looked at numbers. And it was pretty clear where we are. I mean, you could keep pushing, but it doesn't seem like, it's just not there.
Good evening. I'm okay, Mr. President. How are you?
He's literally at home wearing pajamas when Obama calls him. I've shown Bernie supporters, and others who have propagated the Bloody Monday narrative, this exact clip, and the response I usually get from them is, nuh-uh. There are some people who will just never let go of a narrative. Here's the thing, though. At the very least, I'll say this for the voter fraud story. While it's a much more extraordinary case to make that there's sufficient voter fraud to overturn a presidential election, or a Michigan primary for that matter, than, say, Barack Obama coordinating the dropout of a couple of candidates, the voter fraud narrative is at least internally consistent. By that, I mean, if someone is really switching votes, that actually would change the outcome of the election. The same cannot necessarily be said for other, softer narratives of rigging. Maybe Bernie Sanders does way better on Super Tuesday if Klobuchar and Buttigieg were in the race. And maybe then he goes on to win the nomination. We don't know. What I do know is that if your candidate needs 5 opponents in the race to win, then you have a terrible candidate. What I also know is that there's nothing illegal, immoral, or illegitimate about candidates dropping out and making endorsements. They have no obligation to stick around for anyone else's benefit. And what I also know is that when more people vote for the other guy in an election, that's not called rigging, that's not called scuttling, that's not called robbing, that's called losing. Amazingly enough, someone unexpected finally seems to have come around to this.
Look, I find it supremely ironic that he compares Fetterman to Bernie Sanders, and is like, Fetterman should be more like Bernie Sanders. That's the implication. Bernie Sanders lost, Dippy.
Kyle maintains that Bernie was robbed in 2016, which isn't true, but I'll take what I can get. Bernie supporters do not have a monopoly on refusing to face the truth of losing an election. In fact, it's a pretty common thing in American politics at this point. I mentioned Trump supporters earlier, who wet their beds whenever you mention that he lost. That's also true of Trump himself. But to a lesser degree, there's also Hillary Clinton. She did concede the day after the election, but she and so many of her supporters have yet to take responsibility for her loss in a meaningful way. Many of them still resort to blaming butthurt Bernie supporters and Russian disinformation on social media. Hillary Clinton wrote a book about this titled What Happened. I have to say, it's the only book I've ever read where the cover is far more informative than anything inside the book. The thing about Bernie supporters, or more broadly, the populist left, is that their narrative frequently undermines itself. The story the populist left tells is that the establishment is self-serving, and more importantly for our purposes today, out of touch with regular people.
These are feckless, ridiculous, totally out of touch, clueless leaders.
They don't know what regular people want or need, which is why we need to get the populist left candidates in positions of power so that they can actually represent the people and deliver on their agenda. And make no mistake, the American people are progressive through and through. How do we know this? From opinion polls, of course.
The common sense consensus majority view is across the board solidly on the left. Raising the minimum wage, raising taxes on the wealthy, pro-unionization, raising taxes on corporations, universal health care, free college, legalizing marijuana, abolishing or at the very least reducing student loan debt. I haven't seen a poll on eliminating all student loan debt. That's why I reeled that one in a touch. But like solidly on the left, getting money out of politics, taking no corporate money. By the way, what's your position on that, Andrew? We'll get back to that. So the common sense consensus view is like Americans want social democracy.
Opinion polls, what Charles Krauthammer called the most ephemeral, manipulable, and unserious of all expressions of public sentiment. This is what they hang their hat on, until they don't. What do they say when the polls don't go their way? Well, then they agree with Krauthammer. Here's what Kyle said when the polls showed that the majority of Americans supported more hawkish action against Russia after they invaded Ukraine, including implementing a no-fly zone.
Look, the no-fly zone one is 25 points over water. That means the American people overwhelmingly want a no-fly zone. Here's the problem with the poll. People don't know what a no-fly zone is. People don't know what that entails.
He's almost certainly correct about that. Here's the thing, though. Why doesn't he have the same level of skepticism when he likes the results of polls? How he knows the difference between polls where Americans are well informed on the issues and ones where they're not, I would love to know. I've never seen a single populist leftist reconcile this. They just continue to operate under the assumption that left to themselves, most Americans will go with progressivism. Listen to what Kim Iverson says here, as Brianna Joy Gray, the former press secretary for Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign, nodded along.
I don't think Bernie's going to be running again because I do think that Joe Biden is going to be running again. And even if Joe Biden didn't run again, the Democratic Party is not selecting Bernie Sanders to be the nominee. And I think it's become abundantly clear to many of us that who they put their power behind is who ends up ultimately getting the nomination. It doesn't seem to be based on who's actually popular amongst the voters. They figure out a way to ensure that other voters come out and end up, changing the outcome.
The candidate who was more popular with the voters lost because the establishment got more people to vote for their opponent. Now, call me old-fashioned, but I think that the way we ought to find out who is more popular with the voters is by letting voters directly decide who they like better through these things called elections. I really don't know what she means here. I don't think she's suggesting voter fraud or anything of that nature. I really think she thinks that when a populist candidate wins, it's because people liked that candidate, and when a non-populist candidate wins, it's because some evil consortium somehow manipulated the process. This is the defining quality of online left-wing populism. Political scientist Jan Werner Müller says that the core claim of populism is that only some of the people are really the people. I believe that the core claim of the populism of the online left is slightly different. Only some of the electoral results count as the real results. In other words, it's only democracy when we win. The online left doesn't just do this for opinion polls or presidential primaries. They do this in pretty much all races. Let's take a look at when congressional candidate Alexandra Hunt was on the Young Turks. Hunt was probably best known for being an ex-stripper. It's really a shame that she would debase herself like that, throwing away a career that's actually useful to try and become a scummy politician. But I digress. She was running in Pennsylvania's 3rd District, but it didn't work out. Her loss was actually announced live on the Young Turks while she was there.
It looks like he's going to win big tonight. Do you get discouraged from politics? Do you want to do politics again? I know it's just tonight, and you'll have a lot more time to think about it, but what's your sense of it today?
I'm still waiting for the votes to be counted.
Yeah, and by the way, every right to. So this just happened. I hate to do this, but 38% reporting, and now they're calling it for Dwight Evans.
Okay.
So how did she explain away this loss?
Tell us your version of what happened in this race.
Well, I think that at some point he kind of shut off. And he stopped coming around Philadelphia. He wasn't out at the polling locations. He didn't do any GOTV, and he just fully relied on the machine. And that it became, are the people stronger than the machine, and can we break it?
And so, I mean, as the results come in tonight, the machine, at least in your district, looks like it's really, really strong.
If it's not the voter machines, then it's the machine, or the establishment, or the DNC, or some other group of villains operating from a smoke-filled room. What's important is that, left to themselves, the people surely would have voted for her. There's always some reason why the populist leftist lost. A reason other than voters didn't want them, that is. And the online left is constantly coming up with excuses because their candidates are pretty consistently losing to the establishment. Of course, the reason people generally, not just the online left, downplay or deny the results of elections is because they're narratively invested in them. Acknowledging that a race went against you is hard enough as is. Acknowledging that it went against you because maybe your fundamental theory about politics is wrong is even harder. The thing that separates the populist left from the rest is that their denials also undermine their fundamental theory. In the process of explaining away election results they don't like, the populist left concedes a number of points to their opposition, even if they don't realize it. Brent Welder's appearance on the Vanguard podcast is probably the best distillation of this that I've ever seen. For those of you who don't know, Brent Welder was a Bernie 2016 staffer who ran to represent Kansas's 3rd congressional district in 2018. Despite having the backing of the Justice Democrats, the Young Turks network behind him, lots of grassroots funding, and the endorsements of Bernie and AOC, Welder ended up losing in a close primary race to the establishment-backed candidate, Sharice Davids. So you all know the drill. Why didn't this election count?
I think if we go out there and make the case and tell people why we believe what we believe and why it's the right thing, just like they do, just like when they go to vote on a ballot measure, I think that they will support those candidates. But what happens? What does the Democratic Party do when someone in a primary dares to run on a platform of actually going out there and making the case? We never get progressives in the general election, right? I mean, in my primary, I had raised the most money. I had, the most endorsements. I was making a strong progressive case. I was beating the incumbent Republican congressman in the polls by the largest margin of any candidate in the country. And what did the Democrats do? They got some billionaires to pour a bunch of money into to funnel it through Emily's List, and then to run $700,000 to $1 million. Really, it was $1 million after it was all said and done, of ads against me right before the election, so that I lost by a couple of percent.
Pretty typical stuff there. The mood of the interview wasn't grim, though. In fact, everyone there was quite happy about a progressive victory in their state of Kansas. On the night of the most recent Kansas primary elections, which this interview was closely after, an amendment to the state constitution was up for a vote. If passed, the amendment would have changed the state constitution such that it was no longer a right in Kansas to get an abortion. Surprisingly, given that Kansas is a deep red state, the amendment failed by 18 points, a wider margin than Trump won the state by in 2020. Welder argued that the margin would have been even larger were the whole thing not rigged.
The whole process was so incredibly rigged against the pro-choice side of this that even with the 20-point landslide that it was, had it been a fair process, it would have been even bigger and in the state of Kansas.
The fact that the ballot initiative was successful, in spite of it being rigged, in favor of the pro-life side, is proof that the electorate is fundamentally progressive, and that being a loud and proud progressive is the key to winning elections, even in deep red Kansas. And it's not just that progressive ballot initiative that was successful. Progressive ballot initiatives are oftentimes successful, including ones passed when Welder was on the ballot himself.
I think it just goes to show again that the people are progressive. When people have an opportunity to actually weigh in and affect change and know that their vote can directly lead to progressive change, they overwhelmingly support it. I mean, not only this vote, but you guys remember the anti-labor so-called right to work vote that was in Missouri the day that I was running in 2018 that went 2-1 pro-labor. There was the $15 minimum wage in 2020 a ballot measure when Trump got elected there in Florida that won 2-1 for a $15 minimum wage. And why does it keep happening over and over and over again?
Despite this appetite for progressivism, even in red states like Kansas, the Democratic Party is so out of touch that they cannot get people elected there.
And it's just yet another progressive ballot measure that passes overwhelmingly by the people in a place where establishment Democrats cannot figure out how to even get themselves elected, let alone how to achieve policy victories.
In fact, they actively try to undermine progressives who would surely win. Welder's evidence for this is that in his race, he pulled the best against the Republican incumbent, Kevin Yoder.
I was beating the incumbent Republican congressman in the polls by the largest margin of any candidate in the country.
So let me see if I can try and reconcile Welder's various claims here. The majority of people, even in red states, are progressive, as evidenced by successful left-wing ballot initiatives. Yet, the reason why people don't get the progressive candidates that they'd really like is because the Democratic establishment won't let it happen. The Democratic establishment, that is, that's too oblivious to get candidates elected in places like Kansas. And make no mistake, the people really wanted Welder, as evidenced by the polls. So the people of Kansas's 3rd were well informed enough about the race to answer the poll question in such a way that favors progressives. Yet, when the time came to vote, all of these well-informed would-be progressive voters were swayed by some 30-second TV ads they saw to vote for the moderate establishment Sharice Davids. And they were tricked by the establishment that is so out of touch that they cannot get people elected. Yet they're so in tune to people's desires and fears that they're able to engineer the outcomes of elections. Also, if the Democratic establishment is so out of touch that they cannot win in races like Kansas, but they beat Welder, what does that say about him? For what it's worth, Sharice Davids won her race against Republican incumbent Kevin Yoder. Furthermore, progressive ballot initiatives that were on the same ballot as Welder passed, which means that they weren't rigged, unlike his election, which I guess means the establishment isn't inherently hostile towards progressivism, or that the people were capable of overcoming the rigging in these instances, just like they were with the abortion ballot initiative, but they couldn't do it with his race. So progressive victories prove that the people are progressive. Progressive losses prove that the people were manipulated and devoted against their interests and desires. By the way, claiming that the people are constantly being brainwashed by elites is hilarious coming from populists who love to tell us that we need to listen to the people. The claim that the people are progressive is simply an unfalsifiable hypothesis. Electoral results can only prove its truth. They can never prove that it is wrong. Evidence is an occasional convenience. It's by no means necessary. In other words, for the left, it's only democracy when they win.